It is my pleasure to introduce Anne Simonton. Anne is a member of the Commission for the Prevention of Men's Violence Against Women. I thought I'd just try that out. Or also known as formally the the Santa Cruz Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women. And Anne is also a longtime media activist working with the nonprofit Media Watch. Her current projects include a mural to celebrate Indigenous local tribes. Thank you, Anne, so much for joining us.
I just want to preface my talk that it's difficult for me as a woman to be speaking about prevention, really, because it seems to be best done by men speaking to men. I want to say that gender and sexual identity are clearly very fluid, and that I don't think any human should have to consider what genitals they have before they speak, before they explore what life has to give. I've always been a curious person, and I hold enormous compassion for humanity, all genders, races, sizes. I'm fond of expressing my sexuality. I don't want to censor anybody's sexual explorations, but I do love to talk about choices and broadening that idea of choice and what I see is a lot of very harsh restrictions for all of us. In this picture, you can see that I've been a longtime activist in this community. I've been lucky to speak around the United States and the globe advocating to end male sexual violence. And if you can tell from this picture, one of my major goals always has been to help people laugh, showing the absurdity of life, how really ridiculous it is that we want to turn a human into an object or a piece of meat in this case. My work and the work of the feminist work that I've done has never been about blaming people, but instead to try to nurture a kind of curiosity towards solutions. I think really the work is about kicking down doors to make room for social change where humans can experience more freedom, choice, and intimacy. Back in 1984, I started Media Watch. I understood that those who tell the stories rule the world, and media literacy is essential. It's an ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and produce media. It's the process of becoming active rather than a passive consumer of media. And media is very significant in our globe. It shapes our values, our ideas of good and bad, right and wrong. I found that the average citizen will spend 44 years of their waking life in front of screens, which is, it used to be 10 back when I was speaking regularly to colleges. Children are getting so much media. They're seeing 5.5 hours and they're under 3 years old. We need to uproot media that normalizes and promotes violence against women and the hatred of females as well. Media is a very powerful network of corporations. It exerts influence over the content and distribution. Prevailing ideology has to always appear as natural, inevitable, and consensual to be fully effective. Media corporations are using our airways without paying a penny of rent to our government. This is something we don't really think about, but our government gives away this priceless commodity to corporations who fill the media with advertising. And there's so much that we don't know and that we don't act on, and that this could really help us transform the world into a world that would be more compassionate and caring. We can see that most of the rapists do go free, and more than 1/3 of women and 1/4 of men in the U.S. will experience sexual violence during their lives. That's according to the Center for Disease Control. We need to remember that rape isn't about sex. It's about men's need to dominate and control another human. Rape is an action men take, a behavior that they decide to do. We all have choices, good or bad. What are we going to do in the moment? And it's a choice. Rape and sexual assault have more than doubled in just the years between 2017 and 2018. And based on a survey, it's estimated that 734,630 people were raped, threatened, attempted, or completed in the United States in 2018. 80% of the women murdered on the earth each year are killed by intimate partners or family members. That's kind of unbelievable. And it starts to show that most of the cultures really are unable to teach one another the power of loving and being able to receive love. And that's really a sad reality. that I was listening to Julie Bendel speak recently, and she said that more women will end up in jail from acting out mental illness, addictions, PTSD, and all the different problems that go along with being sexually abused in our culture than the men who rape, beat, and abuse them. I would love to follow up on that statistic and see if there's one for the United States or if that's true across cultures. And the economic cost of rape across the United States is nearly $3.1 trillion. That's the lifetime economic cost. And in 2016, the global cost of violence against women is estimated by the UN is $1.5 trillion just for 1 year. That's 2016. I think Jackson has explained kind of what the man box is, but it's basically the rigid stereotypes that men are forced to live in and that confines them. So this was a study, the harmful impacts of masculine stereotypes in the United States. They did a study on this. And they found that young men who were in the man box were statistically more likely to engage in harmful behaviors compared to the respondents outside of the man box. And for example, men in the man box were 3 to 7 times more likely to report perpetrating physical bullying and 3 to 6 times as likely to report perpetrating sexual harassment. Being overly competitive and dominant is a recipe for stress-related diseases, violence, and general unhappiness. So clearly, there needs to be more space for a broader range of what's known as masculinity, giving men and boys more options and choices for how they want to live their lives. Men in the man box might mistake listening to mean, I'm just going to wait my turn and change the topic. But really, listening can allow the listener to discover the unexpected. The prevention is about looking at the attitudes that are formed and what has become normalized in our culture in order to prevent the violence that is at the top. We have to work on how to build moral courage to help them stand up to bullies. Definition of masculinity doesn't have to be so rigid and confining. I think that, we really can do better in so many levels. In 2020, while all of us were sheltering in place, more than 600 mass shootings occurred, and there were only 417 in 2019. And in 2021 so far, we have 147 mass shootings as of April 16th, and this doesn't include domestic violence murders in private homes, which I thought was interesting not to include domestic violence murders in private homes. Part of the normalization, and we can go to the next slide, is the media culture like Grand Theft Auto. These are from Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto is incredibly popular, one of the most popular kinds of media, mainstream media entertainment in the video game world. And it's very much a part of the rape culture. The game promotes gang rape, sexual assault, prostitution, as you're living an experience through the thug's life fantasy. It simply is not able to be regulated. It's become so normalized. It's on its number 5 level. I've watched it since it first came out. It's much more graphic now. It's much more realistic. And kids can buy it, thanks to the First Amendment lawyers who make certain that it's available, even though it says on it not to be sold to anyone under 18. We were creating a kind of social media experiment. What's this going to do to our 6-year-olds who are looking at this kind of violent pornography and the glamorization of murder? And all these women in the image they're prostitutes. It's very graphic. Resident Evil is also incredibly graphic. And Call of Duty is a video shooter game that they use to train the military to kill. Pornography has clearly won. In Santa Cruz, I've often gotten arrested for it. I've done different things to try to bring attention to so that the corporations take responsibility for the distribution of it and the content. The conversations never took place, really. They were overwhelmed by the pornography industry. And Pornhub is one of the most prolific adult websites. In 2020, it was averaging over 100 billion video views in that year. So the numbers have actually gone up since 2019. And that's also due to sheltering in place, where they made content, their premium subscription free. And the US interestingly leads most traffic of Pornhub to the websites. Most of the content is coming also from the United States, although it's everywhere. And you could see there with the amateur content that there's plus 98,000 amateur videos. And this was, New York Times did an expose, Nicholas Kristof, last December, called The Children of Pornhub, and described how young girls, or unconscious young girls, are being stripped and raped, and that they're real individuals. They're not like actors, and that their rapes and humiliations then become part of the marketplace of ideas on the big, World Wide Web, and it never goes away. And that this reminder of their humiliation is a continuing problem for them. That we don't have the technology to be able to erase that is also very frightening. But Pornhub continues to be more popular than Netflix, Amazon, Yahoo. It's based out of Montreal, Canada. And it's created through the company MindGeek, who has a variety of different platforms. So when the New York Times did this expose and said, oh my God, look at these horrible things they're doing, they took a few down, or they moved things over, or they changed a few rules. But basically, MindGeek has so many different platforms. They just probably put it on different platforms, making it available. And if you look carefully at this thing, it says 169 years of content. There's 169 years of content to watch. That they're uploading all this petabytes and terabytes. Petabyte is a billion gigabytes. How we teach sexuality and intimacy is vital to our youth. We're being exposed to extremely violent porn content, with extreme violence being incredibly popular. It's based on humiliation. It's not about love, concern, consent, kindness. I know we can do better. We could give toys to our kids. Maybe they could end up being a good father. The next slide is of a brother who was breastfeeding at the same time that his newborn brother was. And, all the studies, they don't show that men are necessarily smarter at all than women. The actual studies show that women are as smart, but they are often given cues that they should be stupid or dumb before a test or something, or they're dressed in a certain way or something, diminishes their sense of themselves, and they may do worse on a test. Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine is a great book to acknowledge some of that, and also that women are not more nurturing. It's taught. We teach that, and we push it on little girls that they're playing with these little dolls, like you see these little boys doing this. The Black Lives Matter movement really altered my understanding of all of the privileges I have by being white. Much of what we are asking is for all of us to start to look at the lie that we have to live in order to maintain white supremacy and dominance. We have to always think, oh, somehow we deserve this treatment. And it's a lie. And we know that it's a lie, but we still live the lie. And we live it as long as we're not actively working to dismantle the lie. In many of the same ways, men have to live the lie of male superiority. They even have found that women can be just as strong as men. Women have, been able to lift cars off of their children. We don't even know our own capabilities. There's an enormous amount that we can do as parents, caregivers. We can challenge our own perceptions about what it means to be a man or a woman, to be wealthy, to be white. We need to start difficult conversations about respect, nonviolence, and teach about how the less powerful can find safety. And that's part of our job, is to make certain that we're taking care of everybody in our community. Parents and teachers can start to work on challenging youth on issues around gender equality, masculine stereotypes. Mainstream media culture holds tremendous opportunity to normalize diverse, respectful depictions of masculinity, femininity, and gender nonconforming individuals, so that we can abolish these harmful, outdated male stereotypes of being a tough, unfeeling bully who uses force to get his way. The thing that's so important is that our silence in action is an overt act of complicity. And our survival depends on our ability to recognize that our well-being and the well-being of others are in fact one and the same. We can accomplish this change together. We need everyone to get involved. We need to be creative, to use humor, but most of all, it's going to take enormous love and compassion for humanity for us to succeed. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight.
Thank you so much, Anne. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Santa Cruz County Sheriff Coroner Jim Hart. Sheriff Hart has been a law enforcement professional serving Santa Cruz County for over 30 years. He is also an educator, having taught criminal justice at the college level. More recently, Sheriff Hart championed 21st century policing and its successful and collaborative implementation at the Sheriff's Office. More information on community-based policing paradigm can be found on our website. It is my pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, Sheriff Hart.
I want to thank Lauren and Claudia for all your work of putting this together, and then also Jackson and Ann for being with us tonight. It's a really important discussion to be having. So I had the opportunity to watch the bystander moment in the last few days, and as I was watching it, I was agreeing with Jackson on a number of areas where he talked about one area where he was saying, you know, it's not that difficult to stop the event from occurring if it's some sort of assault, but it's much more difficult and takes a lot more courage to talk to a colleague or a friend or a family member about their language or their behavior, and to intervene in that way. And when I watch the George Floyd killing, having been in this job for 33 years, clearly Derek Chauvin was the alpha officer. He was the experienced officer, and the officers that were standing around and milling around were clearly troubled by what was going on, but they didn't have either the courage to step in, or they didn't know how to step in because they were so new. And they were also, I'm sure, fearful of how they would be viewed by their peers or by Chauvin himself. And so, you know, I'm not condoning their behavior, but like Jackson said at the beginning, I think it's important to understand it. I think that there needs to be a lot of training on the duty to intervene for not just police officers, but a lot of different professions. And historically, law enforcement has been a very male-dominated profession. And so tonight, I wanted just to talk about a few areas where I've seen some real culture shifts in law enforcement during my 33 years. And one area that it sounds bizarre now in 2021, but back in 1988 when I first started, we only had one locker room at the sheriff's office. And we were stationed down at 701 Ocean Street, and our locker room was in the basement. And so it was not uncommon for me to show up to my shift and get dressed and undressed and next to a female deputy. And I remember how uncomfortable I felt. And yet, being brand new, I didn't want to be known as somebody who was causing a problem, and I didn't really have the guts to ask anybody, hey, why do we do it this way? I played high school and college sports. We always had separate locker rooms. It was a very odd thing to have. But as I look back on it now, I wish I would have said something to a supervisor or manager, because it was uncomfortable. And now as the sheriff, I would be mortified if one of my employees was going through something like that and didn't speak up, because all they have to do is speak up and it would get changed. And so anyway, that was sort of one example. I look back and I think, you know, I should have had the courage to step up and say something, because I know if I was feeling uncomfortable, there was probably others that were feeling uncomfortable as well. Another area that I've seen a very significant and important culture shift is not just men, but we've improved over the years. When I first started, we were less than 10% female in our office. We're up to 35% female now, office-wide. And women are in a lot of important positions across the sheriff's office. But a deputy was viewed as being weak if they sought any kind of help after a critical incident, or if they were having some family problems or marriage problems. And so it just never happened. People would just sort of silently struggle through whatever it is that they were struggling through. If you were working and you went through a critical incident, maybe some horrific case or some sort of a shooting, the expectation was that you would just suck it up and come back to work the next day and deal with it. And over time, we have developed a really strong employee assistance program and peer support program where our deputies have the ability at any time to speak with therapists and counselors and talk some of these problems through. And I think it's really important that people have a clear head and a healthy body when they put that uniform on and come out here and serve our community and take care of one another. Another area that I really tried to stress is to create opportunity for all employees, regardless of their race or gender. And in the last 7 years, we've hired not only a lot of women, but we've hired more bilingual staff, whether deputies, correctional officers, professional staff, than we have monolingual staff. And giving people, the employees, and having an office that represents the community, I think has been really important. And with that, I believe in law enforcement today, and particularly here at the Sheriff's Office, women have as much opportunity as men. And it used to be if a woman was promoted, there would be whispers about, maybe she was promoted because she was a woman. And you just don't hear that anymore. And that kind of talk, it doesn't occur. And if it does, it gets corrected really quickly. And so I'm proud of that we're developing or have developed a culture where everybody's valued and everybody has an opportunity to succeed. Last thing I want to talk about is the duty to intervene. And we've had a strict policy on the duty to intervene for a long time. And so if a deputy observes another deputy using force or using language that's offensive to another employee or staff member, that deputy has a duty to step in and say something. I think it takes a lot of courage to put that uniform on every day, but it also takes a lot of courage to step in and say something to an employee that when they're not acting appropriate. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being on the call tonight, and appreciate the time that I've had to talk with you. Thank you.
I am Ashley Keene, the Public Information Officer for the Sheriff's Office. So I will read a few of these other questions, and we'll start off with one. How do you handle conversations with people, mainly men, who view these issues as women being too sensitive and that this is a modern issue that has been blown out of proportion?
It's not blown out of proportion. This is a giant problem. I think feminism is one of the best things that's ever happened to men. Breaking down the idea that a quote unquote real man is someone who doesn't ask for help, who just kind of bears with it or sucks it up. There's so many billions of men who have lived and died lives of quiet desperation, who have not been able to take care of themselves, who haven't had the social permission to even care about taking care of themselves. And the reason why we're seeing a shift in all of this is because of women's leadership and activism. And so when I hear people who are like, well, women, feminists, they hate men, this is so simple-minded and silly. If you understand what's really happening, we're growing, and women are at the forefront of that growth. And the men's health movement is a movement that's attempting to look at ways in which cultural ideologies or beliefs about manhood have harmed men's health. And one example is mental health. Men medicate themselves against the effects of through alcohol, through food, through workaholism. In other words, doing whatever they can not to deal with the sources of some of their mental health challenges, including depression. And I think there's an awful lot of sad men out there. And I think there's an awful lot of sad fathers out there who are disconnected from their children. Men are harmed emotionally, psychologically, physically, and sexually by these narrow definitions of manhood. We need adult men to be modeling the behavior that we expect young men and boys to engage in. And if we're going to expect boys, and young men to take risks in their own peer cultures, they have to see adult men taking risks in theirs. There's so much that we need to do with it, boys. It does take, a village to raise a child, but no matter how much a parent does, if we don't change the social norms in the larger society, in schools, in the norms in the community, in the sports culture, in the media culture, the porn culture, parents can be as effective as they possibly can be, and they're still going to have enormous problems because there's all these other influences on your kids. The most important thing to me is raising boys who have a sort of sense of ethical and moral responsibility and courage, identifying strength beyond your ability to impose your will physically, that strength resides in social courage, in other words, standing against injustice. When your friends are treating others with disrespect, instead of walking away and pretending that you didn't see it, saying something. I'm not talking about being a superhero. We always have to say that and do extraordinary things and risk-taking behaviors in the service of justice. But how do you carry yourself and conduct yourself 24/7 in the way that you treat others and treat yourself? There's so much that has been written and films that have been made about this very subject over the past generation, so that a parent doesn't have to start from scratch and like, what am I supposed to do? Watch the film, The Master You Live In, read the book, Real Boys by William Pollock, which has given enormous insights into the issues that boys and young men have to deal with in terms of conforming to certain kinds of norms and how those norms are changing. We have to define strength more broadly.
It says this is all so impactful. So how, as such a diverse community, do we now use this information to be agents of change in Santa Cruz County?
I would say we need to figure out ways of getting men into these conversations. And you're going to make it voluntary. Like, you hope that men will show up. You have to figure out how to change institutional practices to make it expected that men get engaged with it. And so figuring out ways that you can get men in the community engaged across class, race, and ethnicity. For example, the sports culture. Like, for example, youth sports is an incredible angle to get involved with. There's a program called Coaching Boys into Men, where you're training coaches who spend enormous amounts of time with young people. A strong man acknowledges vulnerability. A strong man admits when he makes a mistake. If you're a secure man, if you're strong and secure, and you make a mistake, you acknowledge the mistake. And you say, I'm sorry, I screwed up. If you don't have the ability to do that, you're not strong. They don't back down. They don't admit a mistake. They never acknowledge weakness. This is classic insecurity, anxiety, and weakness. And yet it's presented as strength. It's like a farce. I think we need a whole lot more men taking the risk of stepping out on some of this subject matter. Change happens because people have the courage to speak up and organize and connect with each other and push systems to be responsive. A lot of men are going to be made uncomfortable by this, and I'm not naive about this. There's some men who are very put off by all this, and they think this is all, an attack on manhood and everything else. And it prevents them from actually doing things to move forward and to address real problems. The overall takeaway from tonight's conversation is, yes, we're going to hold men accountable, but in a positive way. And I think that we can be compassionate as well as critical. I think it's a positive challenge. Life is short. Don't live your life in a way that you'll, as you get older, regret not doing things, because you have your life. Take advantage.